All right, appreciate the. Gotta hit the. Am I on?
You are.
Appreciate the energy. I know this is post-lunch. 2 more sessions to go through. We're going to hopefully give you a great panel here. One, I'm excited to have on Al and Tara. Thank you so much for having us and the panelists on as a part of this summit. The growth of hybrid fitness is something that we're all seeing. In fact, the title sponsor of this event, one of them, ABC, published a blog article in September touting the growth of hybrid fitness. Consumers have shifted their behavior significantly post-pandemic. Wearables could be the unlock to learning more about those changes and how operators could play a larger role in their wellness journey. This morning, Pete Moore and I rode a packed SoulCycle class at 7 a.m. in Clarendon, about 6 miles up the road. At the same time, last night, I had 3 conversations with fantastic operators that talked about how spinning and cycling has not been a significant part of the operations over the last year because no one is attending. According to a recent Deloitte survey that was published this fall, 69% of people that own smartwatches or fitness wearables say that those devices have improved their fitness, with 64% saying that those devices have also improved their health. Is there an opportunity for device makers, operators, healthcare providers, and the wellness ecosystem to streamline that experience, to connect wearable and phone data, to deliver personalized recommendations for users and their healthcare providers? Here's another interesting fact from that same survey. 62% of Gen Z said that they would be excited at the prospect of having the health data flow freely to healthcare companies and operators and gym operators. And that just shows that younger generations are a lot more comfortable with providing their data and their fitness information in exchange for improved health and wellness feedback. Well, I am delighted to introduce to you the panel that we have today. I've known these panelists for quite some time. I'm going to do a brief intro and then have them each introduce themselves. Bruce Smith, who is, actually, let me start with Mike Lovek in order here. Mike Lovek is the CEO of MyZone Americas. Go ahead, Mike. I'll have you do an intro.
Introduction?
Introduction, yes.
Oh, so started in the fitness industry in 1987 as a very young kid, working in the gyms. Was on the operations side for 5 years before I joined a company called Star Track, which manufactured treadmill steps bikes. One of the equipment manufacturers in the industry. Was there for 20 years, spent 5 years in Europe looking after our business there. Became president and chief operating officer of the company, led the transition to Core Fitness, which you may know them as today, and then in 2011 left to start MyZone with 2 partners and have been growing. At MyZone, we have 9,000 customers in 84 countries. We've sold 3 million devices to those customers' members.
And then moving on to Bruce Smith, founder and CEO of Hydro.
Yeah, hi, my name is Bruce Smith. So Hydro is a rowing machine. We're a whole health company. I started life as an entrepreneur and then also got sucked into this rowing thing and became I'm Canadian, but I coached the national team level, the United States, and then really wanted to make sure that, as rowing machines kind of eat bicycles lunches. And I know that's, we want to connect that experience that happens on rowing machines to what happens out on the water. So we built the Hydro brand. We have about 250,000 users, 40 million in ARR, and are very excited about our category in both the commercial space and the at-home space.
Thanks, Bruce. Sebastian from NPE.
Hi, I'm Sebastian Barnowski, and I started my fitness technology journey back in 2007. When I joined the small fitness division at Garmin. And for 12 years, I led the Ant Plus Technical Alliance, working with various brands to build the Ant Plus ecosystem, which we all love and enjoy today. In 2019, I decided to change courses a little bit, and I joined North Pole Engineering, where I am director of the OEM program. North Pole Engineering is definitely a technology company. I like to say we're the technology behind the technology. We work with a lot of fitness equipment manufacturers, for example, to implement Ant Plus, Bluetooth, and Apple Gym Kit into the consoles. We also are the manufacturer of the WASP, which is an in-club receiver of Ant Plus and Bluetooth sensors and fitness equipment. Any system like Club Ready or Fitmetrics, Orange Theory uses these devices to basically bridge sensor data to leaderboards.
Thanks, Sebastian. And I was going to say, Rami has not been spending time in the sun, which is why he looks like how he does today.
New haircut.
This is actually Ben Foster. Both Rami and Ben worked at Whoop. Rami unfortunately could not make it. He had another engagement in San Francisco. But so glad to have Ben Foster on. Ben was a former chief product officer at Whoop. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I was the CPO at Whoop until about the middle of last year. I was previously an advisor to the company from the very earliest days as well, back in 2014. And then most recently, in the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time doing advisory type work with companies in and out of this particular space of health tech, fitness tech, wellness tech, et cetera. And I help a lot of the smaller companies think about how they can get to product market fit with some of the new technology that they're developing, as well as helping some of the larger brands and more established companies think about how they can better innovate at scale on the behalf of their members.
Thanks for that, Ben. Ben, I'll actually start the first question off with you. How have you seen users embrace wearables post-pandemic? You were still at Whoop coming out of it, so...
Yeah, sure. Times were actually great post-pandemic in the very beginning. You see that there were a lot of people who decided to join sort of like this wearables movement, this quantified self movement, et cetera, I think in the very beginning of that. In a lot of cases, it was because they had to let go of their personal trainer because they were socially distancing from them, et cetera. But I think what happened is in the earlier stages of the pandemic, you had a lot of demand that was sort of like going to come to wearables get accelerated, and a lot of people started to adopt them at that stage. But then a lot of those wearables companies kind of made this really poor assumption that that was going to get continued forever. And the reality, it was just sort of like more of a blip in terms of growth and adoption of those. And so, of course, on the backside of that, you have now a lot of people who were going to start to use those devices who already had sort of like joined. And so a lot of those companies ended up seeing a little bit more of a flatline growth afterwards. And I think we're now at the stage where it's kind of like caught back up to normal if it had COVID never really happened. I think the bigger part though is the change in how people are using those wearable devices. And back in the day, kind of like pre-pandemic, I think that they were perceived more as trackers, ways of kind of like monitoring various biostats and things like that. And I think a transformation has really happened where people really start to rely on them as a coach, as a guide, trying to give them more insights about their health and their physiology, giving them recommendations about how hard they should be working out in a given day, how much sleep they need, and so on. And so you kind of get this movement towards more holistic recommendations, and where people start to actually rely on the data to try to like make their judgments about how they're living their lives in a given day.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that we in our industry, in the commercial fitness dues paying club industry, have seen a shift not only in the way people are working out inside the club, but where they're working out. I think Terry showed this slide yesterday where prior to the pandemic, 63% of all workouts were done inside the club and 37% out. So it was 2/3 inside the club, 1/3 outside the club. So it's still really important to connect with your member outside the club to make sure you maintain that 360-degree view of your member. But now, post-pandemic, and I mean, we are out of the pandemic, it's 50-50. 50% of workouts are being done inside the club and 50% of workouts are being outside the club. So now more than ever, it's important to connect with your member and add value to your members' workouts outside the club.
Yeah, I think those wearables that people invested in heavily during the pandemic because they couldn't go to the gym anymore. So it was a good time to be a wearable company. Not so much after the pandemic, but people have those wearables. They're a lot more educated in terms of what those devices are capable of doing. And because of the pandemic, I think they also have a better understanding of their own physiology and how some of these wearables can give them insights into that. What I've seen coming out of the pandemic is people that bought those wearables are still using them. They're also coming back into the gym, and I think the wearable is a great bridging device between what you can do and data you can acquire inside of the gym and what you can do outside of the gym. That said, I still think we're in a point where the wearable manufacturers, and maybe Apple's an exception to this, I think a lot of their focus has been on the outdoor experience, a lot less so on the indoor experience. So where you have access to things like GPS, you're not really getting the same level of data when you go run on a treadmill, for example, if you're using a wearable. So I think there's definitely a desire for these wearables to be able to connect and bridge indoor workouts the same way that they track outdoor workouts. But I think there's still a gap in getting that. From a North Pole engineering perspective, we're definitely seeing that from the requests we're getting to integrate some of these wearables into fitness equipment consoles.
There is this weird thing, fitness used to be sort of this moral imperative, like, hey, exercise, and now it's become trackable, and there's some actual science. And it was fascinating as a national team coach, I'd spend like 3 or 4 hours post workouts, like looking at the data. And getting the data was really, really hard. And the way to improve and win was to use data better. And now it is really democratized and you can follow people everywhere. So it's this unique moment where I think we were, this room in particular, like we were all in the snake oil business to a degree, and now we're in a science business. And just listen, like, burn 3 hours a day on Peter Attia for 265 episodes, and you'll be like, oh my, like, and the democratization of the information that people have is unbelievably powerful, and it's this converging moment. And if we don't grab it, innovators will. And so I think it's a very, very exciting moment where we can actually start to deliver incredibly personalized, incredibly relevant guidance through wearables. The wearables themselves, they still got a ways to go. Like this weird emphasis on HRV, which is not that useful. Like the science is catching up. There's still like an uncanny valley, but the opportunity is definitely like right in front of us at this moment.
And Bruce, we've spent a lot of time talking about your passion for data. And I know how meaningful that is from a rowing and wellness perspective for you. So I'm going to ask this next question to you. You've used data in a very meaningful way at Hydro. Looking at operators here today, what type of data would be available to operators and to brands? And how do you think they can leverage it to serve their users in a more meaningful journey?
Yeah, John Foley, who's this former CEO, founder of Peloton, who everybody used to follow, said famously that he was going to put gyms out of business. So I didn't get an invitation to this conference until recently. And we had exactly the opposite view. And we were fortunate to watch Peloton's trajectory in the marketplace. But we know that human beings like love to go to the gym and they love to work out at home, and it's something that you need to accommodate. And so the opportunity to take the data you get from somebody's heart rate and their activity and their location and travel with that from their home into the gym and back again has been a long-term fundamental goal for Hydro. And first with the rowing machine, and then we'll continue to introduce new products over time. But it's that seamless relationship between the home and the public space that I think, like human beings, like it's not like we haven't had a fundamental personality transplant. We love being social, but you can't get to the gym all the time. At-home fitness was a good idea in 2000. It was a great idea in 2012. It's still a good idea. Gyms are also a great idea as long as we stay out of a further pandemic. And so it's putting those two things together and being able to track people's actual watts and actual engagement. And what a superpower that is to get to know your members better.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so from our perspective, as you can appreciate, we gather a large amount of data on our users. And when Bruce says he's sort of the snake oil, I think it was a black box. Like we intuitively, our members knew that if they worked out, they would feel better, they would look better, they had some future state in mind. Since the pandemic, we've migrated from a vanity industry. I think it accelerated the migration to a wellness industry, and giving those members the data from their workout, that whole quantified self, understanding what benefit they received from their workout, allows them to actually judge the benefit that they received. So I work out harder on Thursday than I did on Tuesday, but what was the actual benefit? I burned 10%, 25% more calories. I earned X amount of points. But how data relates to this industry is, that whole idea of predictive analytics and using that data to intervene with an at-risk member. If you think about when I talked about a 360-degree view of your member, like we all want to understand when a member is going to quit, right? And so we use check-in data, or we use app visits data to say, like, these are the two markers for who's an at-risk member. If they go from 2 times a week to 1 time a week, alarm bells should go off. We should go message them. But how about if we had all of their fitness activity and we said, what did they do outside the club? What did they do inside the club? They work out 2 times inside the club, but 2 times outside the club. They drop to 1 time inside the club, but 4 times outside the club. Maybe there's a state of readiness to sell them personal training then, and I would message them differently. And so, like, this whole idea of AI and predictive analytics and how we use data is going to be really important, and we're going to need to have a more full view of our member rather than just what they do inside the club, and I think wearable technology allows us to do that.
Yeah, I'll add a couple thoughts on the data kind of coming from wearables and other systems as well. Because of this transformation we talked about, where wearables are no longer just trackers, there's a whole variety of additional data points that I think are sometimes being ignored, which is users are going in and they're putting in what their goals are. They're self-reporting other activities that they've done, like whether they've had alcohol in the previous night, things like that. And all of this information helps to kind of like build a more well-rounded, better, more thorough understanding of that person who's then also coming to the gym. So to the extent that you can then utilize that information to try to drive better recommendations for them, to get them to use the right equipment, for them to then actually choose sometimes not to necessarily work out and injure themselves or burn themselves out, right? These are the kinds of things that are really beneficial. So like when I go to a gym and I'm trying to like lift weights to try to build muscle mass, we all know that a big part of that is actually the recovery afterwards. Well, how much recovery should that actually be? And if a wearable can actually help you to understand how your body is recovering from that workout when you're ready to go do the next one, then you're in a better position to actually help those customers meet their goals. And I think the important part about this is that there's an opportunity now with AI technology, et cetera, to then hyper personalize this experience, but then do that times millions of people. And it used to be the case that was only able to be done through the work of individual people, right? You get a personal trainer, et cetera. They can understand their goals. They can understand what, how they're living their lives. They can give them specific kinds of workouts, et cetera. All of those things that used to rely on manpower can now be done for pennies and can be done on a very massive scale. And I think if you're not taking advantage of that, somebody else will.
And look, we've integrated wearables a lot into operators, quite a bit in apps as well. But that connectivity point for us over the last few years has really been working with Multiple Engineering, with Sebastian, as being that middleware to connect a wearable to equipment. So have you seen a change, Sebastian, coming out of post-pandemic? More people have wearables now than they did pre-pandemic. How are they connecting to equipment?
It's a challenge to connect to equipment right now, to be honest. I think we've established there's definitely a lot more wearables out there. A lot more people have them. A lot of that is being driven by Apple. And if you go into most gyms that I've been to, I think you still see a lot of Apple devices on the wrist. But there are definitely more and more brands that are providing use cases that are compelling to users, especially for athletes. So there's definitely a more variety in terms of the types of wearables that you'll see in the gym. And as I mentioned previously, a lot of these wearables have really focused their user experience on the outdoor experience, where you have access to GPS. And connecting to the fitness equipment is challenging. Apple has done a pretty good job of Apple Gym Kit, so you can tap in paired to a specific console and get your data that way. And you can do that on a spin bike or a rower or a treadmill, and you basically get a very similar data set inside of a gym as you would in outside.
And one more thing I would add to that is because we've integrated with both Myzone and Whoop, APIs are now becoming available. So operators have an opportunity to leverage APIs to integrate and pull data from different wearables. I want to shift gears quickly into the evolution of wearables. Wearables are evolving at a significant pace, I think more than people realize today. We've got an opportunity to kind of have some foresight into what's coming out in the next 12, 24 months. We're working on projects today that could track CGM through PPG, which is a heart rate sensor. We could track your hydration level through a heart rate sensor. So there is rapid evolution happening, which means more data coming out to operators potentially and to healthcare systems than what is available today. And a lot of this is with existing sensors. They're just refining the algorithms to get more data out. I want to ask the panel, and Mike, I will start with you. How do you see wearables evolving over the next decade? You've already announced some stuff. You have some really innovative wearables. I know you're working on more things over the next year, but how do you see wearables evolving over the next decade?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We started out with a heart rate band. That was our first product, and then we developed a product that could be worn on your wrist, in your chest, and it's the same product. That's a patented product that only we make. We announced that we're going to be integrating with Apple Watch in Android Wear, and so that's sort of been the progression of our wearable. What we haven't announced, but we've built in accelerometers into our device, and so we can track sleep, for instance. We can track HRV, our quality, our product is sends a HRV quality signal. The cautionary tale, and there's all kinds of things you can do with HRV, like stress and exercise preparedness. The cautionary tale for our industry is the knowledge gap between our trainers and what the data that our wearables give to your clients. And so, say for instance, we've talked to a lot of our operators and said, "Hey, why don't you do sleep?" And I would say to them, "So Joe, my trainer, I say to him, I got a restless night's sleep last night. What should I do? Because my tracker told me that." Well, my trainer doesn't have that expertise to tell me what I should do. Another use case for HRV would be exercise preparedness. Like some days I worked out really hard yesterday and I haven't recovered fully, and I should have more of a recovery type of workout. Well, do you have trainers that are skilled enough if I went to him 5 minutes before my training session and said, "Well, that whole class or that whole exercise session that you've prepared for me today, we're not going to do it. We're going to do something else because I need rest and recovery." Now, they'll get better results if you had trainers that had that expertise, but there's a knowledge gap between the data that our wearables are giving and can give in the future and the expertise of our trainer that needs to be bridged in order to retain that credibility as a fitness experts.
I got it. HRV is one of my favorite subjects. And I studied a lot as a national team coach, and it is really interesting, and people do love it. It is I think it highlights this really interesting thing, which is the quality of the science and the data that people are using, and how do you make that into actionable, consumable recommendations. And I think that's one of the things we really focus on at Hydro. As a national team coach, you'd have like reams of data from 12 or 16 people trying out for a boat, and then you would spend like a huge amount of time analyzing that and coming up with a training program for each individual. And it's putting together that information. And the really big challenge, like the HRV, there are a bunch of great studies that show that it's very accurate for 6 out of 10 people, and then for 4 out of 10 people, it's not super accurate. And the magic of HRV is in understanding which 4 you shouldn't be using HRV for. And there's so much data. And so the question, I think what's special right now is that we have this opportunity to not just generate huge amounts of data and not just have really complicated screens that exercise addicts can spend their first 2 hours at work doing instead of doing work, which is a great use of IBM's time or whoever it is that they work for. The magic is in what's going to be happening in the next year or two with large language learning models and AI, and the ability to ingest that data and generate something really useful and deliver it into a package that you just, like, you walk up to a Hydro and it says, "Hello, Bruce," and it tells you exactly what you should do, and it takes all of that friction out of it. That's where the real opportunity and the transformation is going to happen, because the extrinsic motivator is the one missing link in terms of actually transforming people's lives. And that's what this data can put together for us, is cohorting people, getting real data about that individual, and delivering the intervention that they need without friction, without work on their part. They just get the thing they need. Super, super, super exciting. And everybody read up on your HRV stuff. It really is fascinating.
We could probably go back and forth on HRV a bit, but I think that the thing that I really strongly agree with you on about this is that wearables are going to continue to track more and more data, whether it's wearables or any other technology, machines that can track, different elements of reps or, tracking fatigue as you're lifting weights in individual reps. The world's going to move towards having everything be able to be tracked. And along with that is this overwhelming amount of data that actually gets in the way of people making decisions where they feel like they're kind of stunned. And they're kind of like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with all of this data. And so what's really going to be the separator between the great products that are out there or the great services, or the great experiences versus everything else is going to be their ability to kind of like parse through that so that there doesn't have to be somebody who has to interpret this information for you, so that it can just kind of like give you the kinds of recommendations that you need, very actionable insights, et cetera. It's got to be distilled. It's got to be really simple and digestible for individuals, whether they're members of a gym, wearers of a wearable device, et cetera. Regardless, I think that's really what the future holds. And I think it's especially important if we're all trying to grow, because there's this history of people going to gyms because they, if you go way back in the day, the slide that was shown with like very, very small numbers of these gyms that were out there at the time, right? It's because they were being frequented by people who their identity was built in that. The reason I go to a gym is because I'm an athlete, or I'm a runner, or I'm a CrossFitter, et cetera, right? Or on the sort of like wellness front, the same kind of things. Like, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a diabetic, I suffer from anxiety. Those are things that are like defining characteristics of individuals. But if you're trying to go more mainstream and you kind of look at this Gen Z population that's out there, what you got to see is that there's this desire for a holistic system. They're not classifying themselves as that. They're not defining themselves as these people, but they're realizing that this data and the kind of like actions that they need to take around their fitness and their wellness journey are part of like a holistic a sense of how they should be living their lives. And so they're not going to get into that level of depth of data because they're not, professionals on a rowing team, right? These are people that are just trying to kind of like live their lives, but they have this new sense of what's important to them. And that's a place where we can all fit. And that's where that growth opportunity, I think, is really going to be in the future.
Real quick take before we move to Q&A on Apple. I know it's a touchy topic, but I'd love to hear from the panel. Ben, I'm going to start with you. Simple question. You can expand on your answer if you'd like, but Apple, friend or foe? And Apple's not in the room today, so.
Apple, friend or foe? Any good question like that's usually going to have a dual answer. It's a little bit of both. It probably depends on your perspective. You could look at it, Apple as potentially disintermediating. You could look at them as a sort of like taking a ton of data about individuals and then holding that data, et cetera. I personally see them very much as a friend in the wearable space in particular. And the reason for that is, one, what they've done with Apple Health Kit to kind of make it that much easier to seamlessly connect different kinds of devices and products so that you can actually build that more holistic experience that is really beneficial, even if Apple's the one who's benefiting from it the most. And then the second piece, and I think this is really important to not discount, is that whenever you've got this new technology that's out there, there's always just this struggle to get the mainstream to adopt it, right? So there was a time that we all thought it would be really, really weird to have a computer in our pockets everywhere we went. And that's totally the case now. Like everybody's got one, right? And there was a time that we all thought it was really weird to wear a computer on your wrist. And now that's sort of like become mainstream as well. And so the hard work that they've done to sort of like make it normal, not just cool, but normal to wear something like that, sort of like invites the opportunity for so much more innovation within the space and opportunities for us, whether it's gyms, et cetera, to kind of reinvent the value proposition for consumers and have this great opportunity that they can take. If you don't take advantage of it, then Apple's probably a foe. If you do take advantage of it, it's definitely a friend.
And we've worked with North Pole on integrating Apple watches for a few years now. And Sebastian, would love to get your take. Apple, friend or foe?
Yeah, I agree. It depends on your perspective. Apple is really difficult to work with if you're a manufacturer or a technology integrator. Definitely a foe. But it's hard to argue with what they've done for wearables in this space. I mean, they made the watch cool again. They put watches back on the wrist. There was a time where people weren't buying watches at all because they had their phones. They didn't need a watch. And Apple was really the first one that put that back on there. And it's also difficult to argue that it's an excellent product. The user experience and integration of that ecosystem They're the only company that actually connects to fitness and equipment in a way that is easy and intuitive and makes sense. Nobody else, well, Samsung has, but not as well as Apple. That's why people are using those products. They have amazing metrics. They're first in the game. Definitely a foe. I think they've grown this space for all the other wearables to catch up.
And Bruce?
Yeah, Hydra integrates with Apple, but it's obviously pure evil and rotting all of our brains from the inside out. But it is really interesting, and we embrace the time-of-flight camera. That is going to be an incredibly powerful tool on everybody's fancy, 15s, and we'll give you some motion capture opportunities, which are very exciting. So it's fun to have a partner at scale who can do stuff like that. They're assholes to work with, but it's great to have somebody who's willing to invest and understands consumer behavior and puts the consumer at the middle of their product. So, we work with them. Yeah.
Yeah, just very briefly, I would agree with the friend and foe. Apple is the #1 selling watch in the world. It overtook Rolex a few years ago. And so in order to meet our members where they are, we have to work with them. A short example of when we worked with them on the equipment side was they came to us, and as an industry, we were so excited that Apple wanted to work with us, and they asked us to put this charging cable on all of our cardio equipment. Well, it was fantastic. It was a 30-pin connector, and it was the old, very large recharge. And then 12 months later, they went to the smaller recharge. And we had capital cardio equipment in the clubs. Many of you remember that had that old charger. And so Apple is looking out for Apple. And if you go into that relationship with Apple with your eyes wide open, then great. Just make sure that the relationship benefits you. And as it relates to wearable technology in our discussion today, make sure you have the ability to get the data, because they get a lot of data from their users, but make sure there's a presentation layer between your member and your club that allows you to get that information.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes for questions. Al?
Let's all burn our iPhones. Questions? That side of the room?
Okay. No, well, I want to thank our panel, and Al and Tara, thank you again for this
Thank you.
great summit. Appreciate you all joining us. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Can the panel stay up there for a quick photo? Thanks.